Okay, good evening, everyone. This is your WAFLT board meeting. No, actually, this is our WAFLT webinar for May 29th, 2024. We're so grateful for Kay Tsukamaki, who is here as a PNCFL finalist for the ACTFL Teacher of the Year in November. And she is, of course, our WAFLT Teacher of the Year. And we're excited that she has taken her time to share with us her insights and what I've heard so many reports about her presentations about the way that we care for our students. And this year and last year and all the years, it's so important that we are recording this so that if you did miss the presentation, you'll have access to this video on our YouTube site, and then you will also have the materials that Kay shares. If you weren't here in person, please know that WAFLT's doing a big push to try and connect with you in any way that we can. So we'll also have some promotions pretty soon to help you grab a few new members, and we'll pay you to do that. So I'd like to introduce again Kei Tsukamaki, who is a Japanese teacher and also has taught Spanish and at Juanita High School. And so thank you, Kei. Welcome, and yours is the stage.
Thanks for the introduction, Catherine. Thanks everyone who's here in person, and hello to all the webinar watchers who will be looking at this video later. I'm super excited to be here, and thanks for inviting me, WAFLT, and setting this all up for all the WAFLT members. I'm going to share my screen so you'll be able to see the slides off to the side. So today, the presentation is Mindset Matters, focusing on promoting student growth by prioritizing students. And I've presented this several times, but this is a new title because the more I present, the more I really think it comes down to the teacher's mindset and our attitudes and beliefs about the people in our room. And so if you've seen this presentation before, some of it will be familiar, but it's kind of a different focus. So if you want to have a copy of the slides, you can, the bit.ly link is available, or I don't know if you want to look at it on your phone, you can grab the QR code. So for today, I'll talk a little bit about my background and the influences on my thinking. We'll talk about what social emotional learning is and how some of the conclusions I've come to about how that impacts what I do in my classroom and what I focus on. And then some of the people who responded as wanting to learn more, one of the topics was about OWL, organic world language and circle activities. So I am not an OWL expert, but I will talk a little bit about how I incorporate some OWL methods into my classroom to help focus on student well-being and social emotional welfare, and then kind of wrap it up. So if you ever have questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. We're a pretty small group right now. So if you also want to just raise your hand and ask, feel free to jump in. So a little bit about me. Thanks for the introduction, Catherine. But fun fact, my students think I love Tom Cruise. I do like his movies and I like the characters he plays, but it is always fun to have something that your students think you love, because I never am without anything to talk about. And for my birthday this year, some of my students got together and made me this bouquet of Tom Cruises. And so it's a prop that I can use in all my classes. It's a lot of fun. It's one of those things that I ask my students to share a lot about themselves. So this way they get to know something about me. Middle photo is my dog. She's my baby, and her name is Raven. And then the photo on the right, I do a Japanese martial art called naginata. And so I also talk a lot about my dog and my personal hobbies in my classes. So that's a little bit about me. Raven and naginata play a big part in my life. And so a little bit of some of what I've been thinking about how my mindset as a teacher really influences what I do in my classroom is Raven. Through teaching Raven, you train your dog. There's these 4 quadrants of positive and negative reinforcement versus punishment. And one thing I'm really big on when I'm teaching Raven is to stay in the positive reinforcement quadrant. So that's adding a stimulus to increase or maintain behavior. So it's kind of like PBIS. You teach the behaviors you want, and then you reward or recognize the behaviors you want with the goal of increasing the probability of that behavior. And it made me think, like, this is a photo of me walking through the creek with my dog because it's her walk. She could do whatever she wants. I let her take choices and make decisions. And I think about, as I'm walking through the creek, I thought about how different that is from how I structure my class and how I make the decision. If students aren't following my rules, they have consequences, like they get a detention or things like that. And so it really made me think about, like, cognitive dissonance about what am I doing for my dog that I'm not doing for the human children in my classroom. And so that's really influenced my thinking in the last several years. And then another big influence on me, this is another photo of me doing my naginata, martial art. And I've started listening to this Kendall Coach. It's a YouTube channel podcast. And the guy who does it has a PhD in sports coaching, which I didn't know was a degree that existed. But he shares a lot of research about how athletes, and especially elite athletes, get really good at what they do. And the more I listen to it, the more I realize this sounds a lot like good teaching. He talks about how do you give feedback? How do you set up relationships in a positive environment so that people want to learn and are willing to take risks? And so if you do any sort of athletic sport activity, I highly recommend this, even if you don't do Kendall, because there's a lot of applications to how we interact with our students in our classrooms, but also how we as adults learn different skills in our own lives. So these are kind of things that are playing in my head as I've been thinking about how am I interacting with my students? How am I supporting my students' social emotional growth and their development as people, not just in a context of learning Japanese. So kind of going back to the basics, what is social emotional learning? Maybe you're familiar with this term. Maybe if you like me, it's been a big push in our schools, especially coming back from online learning and COVID times. So here's a long definition from CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And so just take a moment and take a look. What do you see? Think to yourself, what jumps out at you of all the things listed on screen? So for me, looking at all of these skills, literally none of them has anything to do with actually learning Japanese. Like verb conjugation is not on there, right? Intercultural communication is not specifically on here. So if I were to summarize what is this definition of social emotional learning, it's like, how can we learn to be good human beings, right? How do we learn to interact with other people in a way that is useful for contributing to a collaborative society? And so I think about, I teach students in my Japanese classroom, but if I really value my students' well-being, these are the goals I'm trying to hit, as well as teaching them how to communicate in the target language. This social emotional learning definition really overlaps with these 21st century skills, soft skills. These are the skills that a lot of like business people or employers want to see our students leaving the education system, being ready to be able to do in the workforce. And again, verb conjugation, not on there. Knowing how to bow to somebody in Japanese, when you greet someone, not on there. But these are the skills that our students are learning through the activities that we are designing for them to do in our classrooms. And so for a long time, I and a lot of teachers I know think, well, the content is important and these other skills, they're not in the grade book. They're cool, but they're kind of off to the side. But I really am challenging us to think that it has to be the other way, that these are the skills that are really important. And the vehicle that we help get our students to these goals is through our language content. So some of the three major, I guess, aha moments, things that I've been thinking about as I think about what does social emotional learning mean to me? What does it look like in my classroom where I am the adult and I have all the control to like set up the classroom and the activities for my students? It's really come down to, I believe that the teacher's attitude and mindset is more important than any of the activities and games that a teacher might make for their students to do. And I know, I go to WAFLT conferences and PNCFL conferences, and we learn so much about activities and games, but I know a lot of colleagues who get stuck putting so much effort into activities and games, and then if they're also not supporting students' social emotional well-being, then there's a disconnect. They're like, well, my students are really lazy, and then they're mad and frustrated. I put all the work into this game. You're not doing it. Now I'll just assign you a detention. And that's really not meeting the needs of the students, and it's really not good for the teacher. And so I've really tried to reflect on, I need to put a lot of energy and effort into my own attitudes and mindset in order to have a classroom where the activities and games connect with what the students need and are relevant for my students' goals. One thing I tell my students is nothing we do in class is more important than you. And my students are surprised by this message, but it's really true. I'm like, if you are having a bad day and you just can't do Japanese today, I need you to tell me that so I can respect that and give you some options. But it is hard as a teacher. It is hard for me to accept, like, well, that kid's just going to like sit over there and take a break. And I'm like, it's been like forever. Why can't you just go in? But the message is that like I value them and I value their ability to manage their own emotions, right? Make decisions, problem solve, engage in community. And so that's a big shift for me in recent times. And the bottom line is Japanese is important, but like I said, it's not always the biggest lesson. And in fact, it might not ever be the biggest lesson or goal, because these social emotional goals, right? Being able to manage their own emotions, being able to establish relationships with other people in the room, being able to set goals and achieve goals and reflect on goals. Those are all really important, and Japanese is how we get there. But it can't be my ultimate goal for my students, because then they'll pick up on that. So if this is kind of radical and different for you, it is hard to make this shift. But I'm here trying to share some of what I've learned, how I've gotten here, in the hopes that it can help you all reflect and think about different ways you can approach your students as well. So some ways that this might look, what does this look like in my classroom? If I believe these things, that there are things more important than Japanese, what does it look like? So someone walking in my classroom, it might look like students opting out of doing the class activities. Hopefully, I think if I give my students the freedom to take a break if they need to, or sit out of our circle activities and do something independent instead, I hope that over time my students will learn to advocate for themselves, to express their needs, that if they say, hey, I'm having a hard time, that will be respected and responded to. And so they can kind of unlearn some of this learned helplessness that I'm seeing pop up in my classroom. Some of my students are like, I don't know what to do, so I'll do nothing. And I would like them to learn, like, I don't know what to do. This is how I help myself get out of a situation like that. Approaching my classroom with a focus on social emotional well-being for my students might look like I have a lot of students who I offer accommodations or modifications, even if they don't have a formal IEP or 504 plan. And that hopefully will lead students to understand that they each have individual needs, and that's okay. They don't all have to learn the same way and do the same things or define success in the same way. But it's my job to kind of guide them and provide them with those options. And it might look like me never telling my students no, because the goal is that I am setting things up to provide my students with appropriate choices, so that they can always opt for an appropriate option that will meet the goals. But I try not to just be like, no, you have to do it all this way because I say so and I'm the teacher. But that's very different from a lot of different teachers, right? We're used to, we design the lesson, you do the lesson because that's what I think is best. But so it can look kind of chaotic and it can be a lot of work. But hopefully by doing this, it is moving my students towards a place where they can practice those 21st century skills, problem solving, making appropriate choices, really establishing community with each other and helping each other through all the options. So thinking about approaching our students with a mindset of empowering them and supporting their social emotional well-being, here's a scenario for you. This happened in my first year Japanese classroom at the end of January of this year. And I'm not going to necessarily ask anyone to share. So this is like an individual. How would you respond? Student has gone to the bathroom 5 times in the past 2 weeks, and you time them for an average of 12 minutes per trip. You talk to the student, you remind them that your school has a policy, you can use the hall pass for 5 minutes. Student tells you, quote, 5 minutes isn't long enough, and my tummy hurts sometimes, and that's why it takes a long time to be in the bathroom. Also, fun fact, student walks slower than a melting glacier. You've never seen a student walk slower than this kid in the hallway. So take a moment here and think about how could you respond? How might you respond to this student in this scenario? We'll take a minute here and think to yourselves. All right. Thanks for the questions, Donna. Yeah, do they need to go to the nurse? Do they have accommodations? Student does have accommodations for academic support. But I did reach out to the nurse and I did reach out to the other teachers being like, is this only a first period problem? So old me, thinking about, I'm the teacher, these are the rules, you have to follow the rules, do what I say. Maybe old me, these are things that I would have said, like, well, you can't use the hall pass for the next week because you're abusing it. The rules are the rules and you're being too slow. Or please walk faster. That will cut down on how long it takes you to walk to the end of the hall and come back. Or the school has a policy, if you are out of the classroom for more than 10 minutes, you are marked as tardy absent instead of tardy or absent. And that's a consequence, right? Because then the school follows up with students who are out of the classroom. But approaching this with a mindset of helping the student identify and manage their own emotions, really caring about the student, is asking questions. Can you tell me why your tummy hurts? Explaining to them, you know, your behavior using the hall pass for such a long time is really impacting your peers, and that's impacting the classroom environment, your relationships. And then providing options. If you think you'll need to be out of the classroom for more than 5 minutes, tell me, and I can write you one of these yellow hall passes instead of you holding the classroom pass hostage. So reaching out to the nurse, reaching out to other teachers, we found out it is a problem across the board, or a situation that was happening across the board. The nurse had been contacted. Student, we reached out to family. Turns out the student is lactose intolerant and really likes drinking milk for breakfast. And so first period and after lunch, he's in the bathroom as consequences of the milk drinking. So, reached out to family and talked about, how can we help the student make different choices, talking to the student about, are you aware that this is what's happening, this is how it's impacting you in your class? If I had approached the student with just, these are the rules and you are now in trouble, it could have certainly led to the student shutting down, student deciding it's not worth coming to class at all, I'm just going to never show up, student being having to face disciplinary punishment, right, for being tardy too many times or being marked absent for too many times. It could lead to confrontation with the parent. The parent was aware that the student had to go to the bathroom a lot. And if I had just come down and been like, detention, the parent, may have had a negative response to me. Instead, approaching the student, being like, here's what's going on, reaching out to the parent and being like, we're concerned that it's now causing impacts on his academics. And then giving the student the opportunity. If you need to go for more than 5 minutes, here's the option that you can take advantage of instead, has led to the student advocating for himself. And since January, he's gone to the bathroom more than 10 minutes 4 times instead of every other day. And he's been advocating for himself. And sometimes he's like, hey, you'll take the hall pass, and he's gone, he's back real quick. It's also really helped our relationship because he started asking me a lot more questions about class. Can you help me with this? I don't understand this. Can I come after school and get a little extra practice? And so being able to work with him through this has really helped, because it was like, it's not just about you missing class. It's about what is going on with you that is impacting your ability to do class, right? To do school. And it's really helped me build a positive relationship with the parent. When I reached out to her and I was like, this is what I'm seeing, this is why I'm concerned, here are the options, and these are the plan that I worked out with your student. The mom was really supportive, and has been really willing to follow up with him about making sure he's not drinking milk for breakfast. And I mean, a lot of us have students for multiple years, right? So this is really important to me. I've got this kid as a first year freshman. He might be mine for 4 years. So it's really important to me that I have that relationship with the family as well as with the student, because that'll really carry forward for the next 4 years. So this was just one example of how really making sure I'm shifting away from, you are now like getting a D in class and your academics are suffering, but really thinking about what is going on behind the scenes that's impacting the behavior. So just a quick scenario to kind of take a look at that. Hey, thanks, Catherine. I see in the chat, right? There are things that we don't know, or ways that a student's diagnosis, even if we're aware they have it, that we don't know that it might impact. And things like hall pass rules, or tardy policies about how many minutes you can be out of the classroom. I think really approaching that with a mindset of support and inquiry and being willing to be flexible, even as we know the number of minutes in the classroom really impacts the student's ability to acquire languages. It's a hard balance. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. We're going to talk about OWL, which is Organic World Language Strategies, and about how I use circle time activities in my classroom, reminding myself that the focus is on students, not only on the language skills. So I know a lot of people are pretty familiar with OWL. I think we've been really lucky at WAFLT and also in PNCFL to see a lot of workshops by teachers who've done a lot of the extensive. They do a summer boot camp and things like that. But if it's fairly new to you, OWL is a teaching methodology. And really their focus is kind of on student social emotional well-being, on using the students' interests as the curriculum, building community, incorporating a lot of movement, and using all of that as a way to help students learn the language. So if you're interested, the website is right there. One thing that I've been kind of facing when I'm talking to my own department and people in my district about OWL is I've got some teachers, I know teachers who are like, oh yeah, circle OWL, circle. I do circle activities, but they're not really fun. But then I've seen how they do it, and they're just having students stand in a circle doing their verb conjugation drills. And I'm like, well, that's kind of a little bit different. So just a caveat is that like OWL is a whole methodology. It's not just an activity that you can just like throw in there and expect for magic. All of a sudden my students are going to be able to be empathetic, relationship building problem solvers. So you really have to be willing as the teacher to shift your mindset and your beliefs and kind of embrace some of the difference, the focus on the student and not just the language. But I've seen a lot of positive results from being willing to embrace that and do some of these big mindset shifts myself. So here are some ways that it looks in my classroom. So I'm going to share some photos and then some things that I do to help my students find success with these OWL strategies that are very different from what they're used to in their other classrooms. So this is my classroom. I'm lucky to have a really big room. I'm actually in my room right now. which is not where I usually present. But you'll notice that my students sit in a circle in the middle of the room, and there are table groups off to the sides. So I have a big room. I'm lucky that I can have that tables and the chairs. But my students can sit where they want to. There's some little stools, there's chairs. I actually have students who do sit on the floor. So being flexible and being willing to be like, you know what, if that's what's best for you, you make that choice. It doesn't matter to me as long as you're engaged. But the purpose of the circle is that everyone can see each other's faces, and there's nothing in between, no desks, no barriers, things like that. Fun fact, I have very little cell phone usage when we're in the circle because they can't hide it under their desks. And so that's been a nice positive as well. But within the circle, my students do pair work or small group work. So any of the activities that we're used to doing with students sitting at desks or in groups, you can do in a circle as well. But this is one way that really helps facilitate students being able to interact and move around freely. And then they get a chance to switch up partners and talk to all their classmates. Some structures that I start the year off with to make sure that circle time activities are successful is I have students make classroom agreements. These are 5 categories that came from my school's equity team. And so I had students build class agreements in these categories. And we made posters and they just hang on the wall. And so it's easy to point to and we can reference. And I find these are really helpful in the circle because it's something that students aren't used to doing, especially when they're communicating with each other and we're interacting and talking to each other a lot. It's nice to remind ourselves this is what it looks like to stay engaged in our setting that is very different from other classroom settings. The link at the bottom will take you to a Word document where I've typed all these up. So I know the photo is not super easy to see. Another strategy that I tried this year was to have my classes make a Japanese language learner profile. So a lot of schools have a whatever learner profile, but I had my students do this because I was noticing towards the semester that some of our agreements weren't really playing out in circle time activities as much as I wanted. There was a little drop in engagement, or students were getting more distracted. And so I had students brainstorm, what does a successful Japanese language learner do? And what is a successful Japanese language learner like? And so I had each class do this, and it was kind of fascinating to me. Each class had their own little subculture of what they thought students do and what characteristics a successful student had. My first year students were way more interested in being silly, whereas my upper level students were way more likely to focus on the determined to learn from mistakes and growth mindset. So it was interesting to me to have the different levels do this differently. But this was a way that we were able to kind of focus in at the beginning of second semester and remind ourselves, this is what we do. These are kind of get to our values. What do we believe is important for human beings in our classroom? So some other structures and supports that I have for my students. This is a photo of the front of my classroom. And so pretty familiar, we got the ACTFL posters. We have some useful phrases. Can I go to the bathroom? How do you say that in English? And the question word signs. The ones that my students really like and we use a lot are these 4. And so this one's also linked. But these are to help students communicate in the language. And having these explicitly called out reminds students of all the strategies that they have, options that are available for them to problem solve when they get stuck. And so these have been really helpful for doing those circle time activities, especially if you're really focused on the 90% or more target language immersion activities. So I highly recommend, if you don't have anything like this, this is a great one to help students be able to make choices so that they can communicate and do the activities. So here are some screenshots of my PowerPoint slides. I don't win any awards for them, but these are some routines that help my students. We start off in the circle every day, and this is what they see when they come in. Going back to PBIS, just the reminders of the expectations every single day, phones and earbuds in your backpack. This is what you need to do and what materials are required, and then whatever the warm-up task, read these with your group. We always do the how are you feeling slide, and this is a great way to connect with students and then talk about why are you sad or who else is stressed, and just kind of connecting with them, letting them connect with their own emotions, or even just identifying, I am sad. Why are, it's okay to be sad. We're here anyway. We cheer each other on. The agenda with the learning targets, most schools have this, but it helps remind students this is what we're working towards. Provides that structure. As we get into the circle activities, there's a lot of movement and chaos, but always reminding ourselves these are the goals that we're working towards. And then I always do a calendar. It's kind of a nice way students get to add things with their birthdays, and reminding ourselves to check in about these are upcoming stressful times or things like that. Also upcoming fun times with spring break. And then at the end of the day, I try to remember to pull it back and we reflect, did you reach today's language and content goals? So just some of the routines for my students that help ground them and help them build these reflective skills, goal setting, and goal reflection activities. Please feel free to pop any questions in the chat. I'm doing a lot of talking. There are a couple activities. We'll see if we can do them on Zoom. Some considerations. I'm just finished up doing this book study. It feels weird. I'm in my 13th year of teaching, and this is the first time I've finally done a training on SciUp, because the district's always like, remember that training we did last year? I was like, I wasn't here last year. But a lot of these SciUp strategies really help me as a teacher when I'm planning these circle time activities. I'm really big on like comprehensible input and making sure that I'm doing immersion with my students. One thing that I got out of this book was that comprehensible input, like the students are the only ones who can determine what is comprehensible to them. I do my best to scaffold the language and be intentional about what I am saying. But if a student doesn't get it, it is just noise to them. And so that was a real big takeaway for me. In making sure that when we do circle time activities, that however I'm modeling or teaching or reinforcing, that it is accessible to every student. So some things to think about as you're like, okay, cool, it'd be great to do some of these activities, get the students in a circle, they can turn to their partners, they can talk about something, you can get up and swap partners. But like whatever activity you already have where students are interacting with each other, we really want to make sure that we keep in mind what is the appropriate ACTFL proficiency level for that group of students. One thing I remind myself constantly of is rate and pace of speech. How fast am I talking? How much more do I need to slow down and pause, especially for my first year students? And then things like using idioms can be really hard, because if I don't think about it, like if I'm not planning what I as the teacher am saying, I end up using language that then isn't comprehensible, and then I'm like, oh, I'm stuck, right? So making sure that I'm really intentional about using them, and then using them as a way to teach, introducing culture and advanced language skills. I try to be intentional about when I use English and when I use Japanese in my case. The circle activities, I want to make sure that I scaffold those so the students can interact with each other as much as possible in Japanese. But then I'm like, well, sometimes it's easier to explain things in English because like there's only so many minutes in a class period. But then being intentional about scaffolds and options. And one thing I really recommend is asking your students, what do I as the teacher do? What do I do as the teacher that helps you learn? Because my students have said things to me that I would never think about. They're like, Sensei, your facial expressions are really useful. I'm like, oh, great. I will do more of that. Standardizing the gestures that I use, or having students have a buy-in in like, let's make a gesture for what do you think rain looks like? And so we can agree on, some of these. And then planning out what visuals I'm going to put on the board. as a useful scaffold, and then thinking about when do I put them up there? And the one that I struggle with is when do I take them away? When are my students ready to no longer need those scaffolds so they don't become a crutch? So these are things just to kind of keep in mind as we, if you're going to shift into a circle, it is very different for students. It is very different for the teacher. These are things that we want to make sure we're planning for, as well as not just the lesson. And if you could do all these, it really helps students achieve the language goals and achieve all those soft skill goals as well. So here are some strategies that I use when my students are in the circle. I have family groups, is what I call them. I have one per quarter, and students get to tell me who they want to work with and who they don't want to work with. And then within as much as possible, using their preferences, I make groups based on mixed levels, mixed abilities, and mixed personality types. I try not to have all my quiet, shy, awkward students in one group and try to balance things out. And then every day we'll do at least one activity with your family group. And then I try to do a lot of movement and partner switches so that students get a chance to work with different classmates. And my students know, well, it doesn't matter if you don't like that one kid because you're only going to be partnered with them for like 3 minutes and then you're going to move away and you don't even have to sit next to them. And so I found that that's been really helpful. The nice thing about moving and partner switching is that you can do the same activity repeatedly. And because the students are getting up and walking across the circle or things like that, it gives them it's enough of a little refresh that I've found that my students are willing to do the same thing multiple times. So easy way to do this, if you're thinking about in a circle, I have my students in partners. I say person on the right, stand up and rotate so many people to the right. And then they 1, 2, 3. And then the next time person on the left, stand up and you circle the opposite direction, whatever, 1 pair or 2 pairs or 3 pairs. It's nice because then I can make sure that the 2 best friends, I'm like, switch one more group. And then they don't end up together. Another way to switch up groups is my students and I play a lot of rock, paper, scissors. I think it's culturally appropriate because in Japan, you can do this in a big group. And then you decide, rock, paper, scissors, go, and then whatever. And then whoever wins, you get to stand up and rotate. Or whoever loses, you stand up and rotate the other way. And the students, I don't know, they seem to like it. It's fun to play it in a group because then you have like 4 people going at the same time. And then you can be like, okay, first place person, you're over here, second place person, you're in a different group. Adds a little bit of movement, mixes up the groups quite a bit. I also talked a little bit already about seating options. So I let my students sit basically wherever they want. And I found that this really helps. I have a lot of students with different learning needs or learning styles who really like lying down on the floor, and they participate a lot better when given that freedom than if I insist that they have to sit in a chair. So something to think about if you have the space to do that. It seems silly, but it makes a big difference to the kids who need it. All right. Another strategy or another key mindset for teachers is to celebrate mistakes. And I think we all tell our students, it's okay to make mistakes. But I'm sure at some point we've all done that thing where it's okay to make mistakes, but also that's wrong. Because I'll be like, that's okay, you can make that mistake. But I'm always like, no, that's the wrong particle in Japanese, or you've misspelled that little word. But practicing making mistakes in a silly way helps build the community, helps students learn that it is okay to make mistakes and that we are all in this together. And so this is a screenshot of a game that I recently learned. And the only purpose is to practice making mistakes. This game actually has no language content. So it's a fun one to do at the beginning of the year. Or, you come back from a long break and you want to get kids up and moving. So each person, you're going to pair up and you take turns counting 1, 2, 3 with your partner. And if you get it wrong, you have to throw your hands up. And in Japanese, we say, yatta, or whatever you want to say in whatever language. But you have to stand up and be proud and you shout out, yay, I made a mistake. And then anyone who hears you like applauds for you. And it seems ridiculous, but it helps students get in the habit of, I have made a mistake, I celebrate it rather than like shutting down and being embarrassed. So does anyone want to model this with me on Zoom? I see Catherine. Excellent. All right, so Catherine, you're going to have to unmute here.
I am.
Okay, so we are going to go back and forth, counting 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. And if we get it wrong, we throw up our hands and celebrate. All right, so 1,
2,
3,
1,
2,
3,
1,
2,
3,
1,
2,
3.
Okay, yay, we made it through round 1. Round 2, instead of saying the number 2, you have to clap your hands. Okay, I'll start. 1, 3,
1, 3,
1, 3,
1, 3.
1, 3. All right.
Yay. I should have tried to make a mistake. That was awesome. That's
That's
great
okay.
idea.
Round 3. So if you were to do this with your students, don't show them each round, like only show them one at a time. Round 3, you're going to count 1. The next person does claps. Now my pictures of kicking, I didn't have my students kick each other. But I can't stomp on the floor because the people downstairs have asked if we like parade elephants around the room. But you would stomp or do something else. You can't see us, so let's do 1, 2, and then we'll punch our screen. Okay? All right. 1,
1,
1,
1.
1. Ah, I don't know why I gestured. Yatta! Okay, so like that. And then if you do this with your students, you can impose, thank you, Catherine, for volunteering with me. If you do this with your students, you could tell them you have to go faster. You can't pause and think. If you pause and think, that's a mistake, and you celebrate. The nice thing about this one is everybody's doing this and they get really into it, and then the volume level gets up. And the nice thing about that is then students are now willing to make mistakes and go, yatta! And it doesn't really matter because everyone else is doing their own thing. But then it kind of builds that confidence of, I can do this, I can have fun, I can make mistakes, I can be in a situation that's a little bit stressful, and I celebrate, my partner celebrates, anyone who hears us celebrates, and then you just get a chance to try again. So this is a great game to kind of play at the beginning. But again, it has no language, like no real redeeming academic language value, but it is a way to practice some of those skills that we want students to do. Yeah, Donna says this would be a great brain break. And you could have any sort of variation. You can have them count higher than 3. You can have them count by 10s or 20s or whatever in French. That's really hard. So different ways to incorporate this, but then, always building on that mentality of you can make mistakes. It is okay. Things like that. So just a few more strategies here. It says no cold calling to help students understand that, you work together. You always get second chances. You can make mistakes. I always try to have students work in pairs or groups before I call on students to share out in front of the whole group. And that really reminds students, like, we are not successful until everyone is successful. So when you practice with your partner, make sure they know how to do it so that if I call on them, your partner can share out in front of the whole class. If I let students skip if they're not ready to answer, but then I make sure to either call on them again or they get a chance to redo something if they've made a mistake and they look a little embarrassed about it. So that's another way that I try to make sure. Old me would have been frustrated, like, why don't you do this? Why can't you do this? We've done this a million times. The answer's right here on the board. But like just reminding students, you get another chance. You can keep working through this. You can turn to the person next to you and get some help and then try again, is really helpful for building students' confidence and then building their language skills. And then the last one I got from Yo Azama Sensei, who I love dearly, and is a Japanese teacher and language curriculum specialist now. And he calls this the window of opportunity. And I don't really know if this has anything to do with students' social emotional learning, but it's a visual cue. You say, ask someone, do you have any questions? And then you do this. And the window has closed. So it's a visual cue for students that if you are processing and thinking, do you have a question? You have a finite amount of time. And it's just kind of a fun cue for students because you can tell they're like, yes, 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 I have a question. I need to get my question out. But that's also helps students be able to process and be like, how do I formulate my question? I don't know. I just threw that in there because it's kind of fun. All right. Yeah. Or what questions do you have? Azama Sensei talks about your tone of voice when you're like, not. So any questions? Any questions? Any questions? Like, what questions might you have? And make it inviting so they know you actually want to hear from them. So I talked the entire time. I would apologize, but I'm not really sorry. But if we go back through all my slides, back to the beginning, like thinking about social emotional learning, right? And prioritizing students. But this is all about like, as the teacher, what am I thinking? What am I doing before my students are actually in the room to set up my classes and my activities and the physical environment in ways that support not just their academic Japanese language goals, but gives them opportunities to build relationships, connect with each other's, manage their own emotions, even just identify their own emotions, make good decisions, and be good people. So, whew. Thank you. This is the bit.ly QR code, bit.ly link and the QR code for these slides. And thanks to Catherine for popping them in the chat again. If you access these slides later, the last slides are things that I imported from the first time I presented on this. And the first time I did this, I spent a lot of time talking about activities and games. And so all of these slides have written explanations of some games that you can try. I've left them in here because they're kind of fun to have. It's nice to do, but really my focus was on like the teacher mindset and attitudes. So that's where I spent all the time today talking. That is what I have. So what questions might you have?
Wonderful, Kate. Let's how about we do a stop share and then we can look at everybody while we're thinking. And I have Kay on the spotlight, which means that everybody gets to see her. But if you would like to raise your hand, I will take the spotlight off and make sure that everyone can see your question.
Or if it's not a question, yeah, if anyone has any ideas that you would like to share, I would love to steal ideas from you.
Hey, I just have a question comment for you because this last semester I got to go to Yoshi's Japanese class to observe his student teacher, Maddox Pearson, who was wonderful. Have you met him? He was wonderful. And like he was such a great model. Then I had a teacher at another school, different language, that struggled to have those things. And so any ideas to share your wonderful ideas that you have, like the interaction and all, to that just really keeps them so engaged. It was so much fun. When they think it's might not be that important, you know, that they're articulate and knowledgeable. And like I know you work, I've been to some of your workshops and I know that you work with a lot of teachers. How do you work with others to show them the benefits of how engaging it is and how helpful it is?
That's a big question, right? Like this is like, how do we help convince other teachers?
Yeah, maybe that was my question.
Yeah. You know, so At the very beginning of today's webinar, Catherine was talking about ways to help get more people involved in WAFLT and being members. One thing that I've been really pushing in my department is that we all become WAFLT members. And we were successful with that last year, and we're working on it for this calendar year. But helping make it available to other teachers and encouraging them to go to the conferences. Because for some teachers, like we all get stuck, especially a lot of my colleagues are like, well, I know what I'm doing. I've been teaching this for many years. I'm confident, in my own classroom, but giving them that to seeing different ways. Because I can share with them, this is what I do, and these are the benefits, and this is why I think it's great. And I am one person, but if we can get that one person into a conference and they're like, wow, there's 100 other people, and they all kind of are, a lot of them are kind of doing this other thing, then they might be a little bit more willing to jump on. So that's one thing. But I also really think we talk a lot about our students needing relationships in order to have that foundation where they can ask questions and take risks and being willing to try new things. And it reminds me that as teachers, we need that. I need that connection with another teacher so that I feel vulnerable to be like, hey, I'm struggling with this. Can you help me? And to know that I will get that help in a non-judgmental kind of a way. So I think spending the time building relationships and then getting people involved. Like I like a walking commercial, getting people involved in WAFLT, because it really is, it's important. Like we think we know what we're doing. We're doing a pretty good job in our own classroom, but you have no idea what other people's classrooms look like. And so being able to see that, I think, is a great way to help teachers be willing to start changing some of their mindsets or some of their thinking.
Thank you.
May I
Yeah.
add on to that, Kay?
Yeah.
I think I have seen some really outgoing, energetic, amazing teacher presenters who say, do this, do this, do this. And I'm like that, and maybe you're like that, but their personalities, they're like, I will never, ever be able to do that. And I say, I'm not asking you to do, you're not me, but you can still help your students with these things. Like, you're not going to be able to replicate my style, my energy, whatever it is, but you still need to think about your students and their needs. And I just kind of flip it around like that, because like, well, I would never, let my students lie on the floor. And you're like, okay, I'm not asking you to do that, but I'm saying the big deal is, what are you doing to support your kids?
Yeah, right, for sure. And being able to see different examples of, oh, this is a teacher who's sharing things and they're like me, or this is a teacher who's sharing things, they're nothing like me, but I can find value and something that I can glean from them, even if my teaching style or personality is very different, or even if my students are very different from yours. My students' needs are not the same as yours. But yeah, being able to see those other teacher models, I think that's super valuable.
Thank you for the reminder, Teresita. I'll do that in just a moment. What other questions do we have for Kay? Or experiences or comparisons?
No more questions. We're done. No.
What I will say is that for someone to teach all day long and then to come into a webinar and teach again is a massively thoughtful, wonderful, dedicated person. And yeah, I'm doing the same thing. Okay. It is so important. I know Lynn does it. I know Krista, all of us do this. And here we are, hanging out together. WAFLT's trying to build up this leader cohort. So if you know somebody that's interested in doing something like this, it would be a great idea to what's this called? The shoulder tap, right? Like, how can we get other people involved with this? We don't have to suck them in or, like make them do things that they don't want to do. But I'm just wondering what kind of things that you would like to see, and how can we help find those people in our membership, or someone who's not a member yet, and perhaps we want to bring in to say, hey, you have some great skill set. Let's see what we can do for you here. So if you've got something that you'd like to see, we're going to put this in the chat in just a moment. I won't lie, I'm doing this on the fly because it's been kind of a long 2 days. What we have here for you is, if you are a WAFLT member, as I look amongst all of us, we're all WAFLT members. And this is the form that you would fill out now, please. For participating in tonight's webinar, you would get an hour of clock hours. And if I remember right, Teresita, it does have to be live, right? You had to be in this session. So if you are watching this recorded, please know that we appreciate you, and we hope that you can come to another WAFLT webinar. We're going to be done for this season, right? Like, this is our school season. We might have something in the summer as a kickoff. We just uploaded our, you know what? May I show you where our new ones are? Okay, so here we are. I'm going to go to the WAFLT YouTube. And to do that, we'll put it then there in the chat in a second. WAFLT. I'm pretty sure we got that. Nope. I think we have to go with the whole name. You're going to laugh at me, but give me 1 second, because when you do it live, why not? You get waffles. That's what we are. We are waffles. Oh, I know what we are. We're Washington Association of Realtors. No, for language teaching. There's a shorter way to do this, but here we are on the fly. There we are. Hey. Okay. So right here, we have our 2 WAFLT webinars, and then we have past ones. So for some reason, our name kind of changed on here. Here's the link. And we will make sure that the materials for those 2, so the slides, etc., they should be on our website fairly soon. And if not, I will send out a email blast to everybody with those links, as well as K's, which I'll put on there.
Hey, Catherine.
So that, yep.
So the Edmond School District had a world language teachers meeting, the whole district. And at the meeting, the lady leading it was complimenting the WAFLT webinar. She goes, let me show you some stuff I learned last night from AR. And she showed us this stuff, and everybody got all excited. And she was totally plugging. I think it was, did Brandon do the AI one?
Yep.
She had seen it the Thursday night, and she talked about it to everybody, 25 teachers, and was plugging WAFLT. So the webinars are doing a good job. They're reaching other teachers, at least in the Edmond School District. So
thank you. And share that with your colleagues. Like, share those links with them. In this transition year, I keep saying this over and over. It's very, I'm not Lauren, and I'm still learning, like, what can we do, and what are the procedures? What's the process? How do we make this the thing that we all know that we want and need? So next year, we'll just keep doing this. And you know that we're going to have our fall conference at the Portland Sheraton hotel. So it's right by the airport. You can just fly down or drive down, and it's a co-full year, so they'll be taking care of us. It's October 11th through the 12th. Hopefully they'll have the announcement out soon, and hopefully they'll have the call for proposals, wink, wink. We'd all love you to submit a proposal, or again, I use that, tap somebody who knows something, who's done something, and you're over in your classroom, you're like, ooh, that sounds so amazing. Or if your department wants to share something. Let me look at this question for the last, let me ask about that, because I know you were there about that last webinar. Number 2, is that what you're looking for? Because if you are looking just for number 2, I think I can send that to you right now. But
well,
in any case, yep.
I'm gonna say, while you're looking, I just want to say that, having participated, if that's a word, in all 3 of these, it's like having children. How can you choose your favorite one? They have all been very good, and I want to say thank you, Kay, for taking the time and putting this together. This is pretty awesome, and I'm really glad to hear that, WAFLT is moving in this direction. I think that this is a very positive thing for teachers across the state and beyond for those who might access it on YouTube or something.
We can be helping out our Idaho colleagues, right? We could be helping out our Alaska colleagues. We're in a PNCFL region. Maybe Oregon needs some experience. Not even gonna start that, but okay. So it's been a long day. Everyone needs to either go home very carefully, or if they're at home, sit back and relax. Shishay, of course. Please keep in contact. Let us know what you'd like to see. Please follow us on Facebook or Twitter X or Instagram. We have all of these. And subscribe, like, and love those YouTube videos. All right. Good night. Merci beaucoup. Et
Arigato.
gozaimasu.
Arigato. Thank you. Have a great night.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you so much.